I'm Jen Moore, Program Annotator for Music of the Baroque, and welcome to Baroque Notes, our virtual pre-concert lecture series. In this edition, I'm going to discuss Bach's Easter Oratorio, our upcoming concert featuring, of course, Bach's Easter Oratorio, plus two more pieces by Bach, as well as music by Buckstahuda and Purcell. In this talk, I'm going to discuss the relationship between the social purpose of a piece of music and the way that relates to a composer's choices. It is the first piece on the program, Johann Sebastian Bach's Sinfonia in D major, BWV 1045, that led me down this path of thought. Music of the Baroque has never before performed Bach's Sinfonia in D major, and I'll admit openly that I didn't know the piece until a little over a year ago. The very first time I heard it, I thought, why on earth did he write this? I shared the sentiment with one of my colleagues the other day, and she said that she actually thought the very same thing when she heard it in rehearsal. We know from the handwriting that it is authentic Bach, and the manuscript paper tells us that the Sinfonia was probably composed between 1742 and 1746 in Leipzig, though some scholars date it around 1730. Some have even suggested it dates earlier, from Bach's time in Curtin, which is a logical assumption based on the fact that it is the period during which Bach wrote much of his instrumental music. Let's examine the Sinfonia a bit and look at what makes it so unusual. First, it has a highly virtuosic solo violin part, so perhaps it is a movement from a now lost violin concerto, except that Bach included 3 trumpets and timpani in the orchestra, which at times makes it hard to hear the solo violin. Furthermore, the exchanges between solo and orchestra are fluid, one melding into another, whereas typically in a Bach concerto, the lines of demarcation between solo and orchestral sections is fairly strict. Let's listen to a bit of Bach's double violin concerto from our performance in February 2021 as a reminder of this aesthetic. This features violinists Kevin Case and Kathleen Brower. To our musicological mystery, the trumpets and timpani suggest that perhaps the Sinfonia was the opening of some sort of festive cantata, but those do not typically feature solo violin. And on the manuscript, Bach calls the work an entrada. So it seems reasonably clear that he wrote this for a specific occasion, and it was this occasion that provided the rationale for his musical choices. Without this original context, we are left with a curiosity that is thrilling from beginning to end. As you listen to a little of this piece, do you have any theories? mentioned, some thought Bach's Sinfonia was written during his time in Curtin, because that's when he composed most of his instrumental music. And Bach's employment circumstances definitely prompted much of his musical output. His job in Leipzig makes this especially clear. In 1723, the town council of Leipzig was faced with filling the position of the cantor at the Thomaskirche. Responsible for practical music in the school and its associated churches, the job had traditionally been filled by a pedagogue. On this occasion, however, the city fathers decided that a well-known composer might better enhance their cultural reputation, so they offered the position to Georg Philipp Telemann. After Telemann refused, they tried to obtain Christoph Graupner, who could not get out of his current post. Finally, they turned to Bach, but as the council minutes indicate, not without reservation. Since the best could not be obtained, a mediocre one would have to be accepted. Bach signed a contract on April 19, 1723. Many of Bach's most beloved sacred compositions were written during his time in Leipzig. Bach had to provide cantatas tailoring the generic service to the specific day in the Lutheran church calendar, and his passions and other large-scale vocal works were also intended for the city's churches. Other pieces, including his motets, are less familiar. A product of the medieval period, motets came into existence as multi-voice compositions with text. By the end of the Renaissance, they had evolved into highly expressive sacred madrigals performed during the church service, while not strictly part of the liturgy. By the late Baroque, the genre was not very popular, but Bach still composed 6 authenticated motets in Leipzig, several for funerals, and some perhaps as training exercises for the choirs he directed. One of these motets, Komm Jesu komm, was written around 1731 for an unknown occasion. It's based on a fragment of a poem by Paul Teimich, who was a teacher at the Thomasschule in the generation before Bach. The text offers a first-person perspective on the end of life and anticipation of the coming meeting with Christ, referencing John chapter 14, verse 6. I am the way and the truth and life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Bach responds passionately to Teimich's setting, using both the sonic possibilities of double choirs and striking musical imagery to express the poetic sentiment. Komm Jesu komm opens with all the voices together, the multiple repetitions of the word komm gradually forming an impassioned plea. As the speaker's strength ebbs, the musical texture becomes thinner and more disparate. Bach seizes upon the text, Der saure Weg, the bitter journey, as an opportunity for a moment of striking dissonance. The motet concludes with the speaker accepting death, set appropriately as a peaceful and poignant chorale. On the score, Bach labels this section aria, perhaps calling attention to the fact that the two choirs become a single voice at the end. Next on the program, British tenor James Gilchrist, who will perform the role of the evangelist in our April 2023 performances of Bach's St. Matthew Passion, will perform 2 solo works by Buckstahuda and Purcell. Like Komm Jesu komm, these have a much more intimate feel and are more nuanced in their musical expression. This is not surprising, as both pieces were in all likelihood written for private devotion, performed in smaller spaces for an audience who might feel the musicians were communicating directly to them. Born around 1637, Dietrich Buckstahuda was a renowned organ virtuoso and composer. At 31, he secured employment at the Marienkirche in Lübeck, one of the most important churches in North Germany, where he remained until he died in 1707. Buckstahuda's talents attracted the attention of numerous composers, including Handel and, somewhat infamously, Bach. According to existing documents, Bach requested 4 weeks' leave to travel to Lübeck in order to learn one thing and another about Buckstahuda's art. To his employer's dismay, however, Bach stayed about 4 times as long. Although Buckstahuda's position at the Marienkirche required him to compose a large quantity of music for organ, and it is these compositions for which he is most well known, his vocal works outnumber those written for instruments. Quemmodum desiderat cervus illustrates his sensitive and nuanced approach to text setting. Composed sometime between 1680 and 1690, the piece may have been intended for use in a service, or even more likely, private devotion. Buckstahuda cast the text, which is based on Psalm 41, verses 2 and 3, in the form of a chaconne, melodic variations over a repeating pattern in the bass. Rather than creating a feeling of predictability, the rigid framework anchors vocal and violin lines that sound almost improvisatory. Buckstahuda uses subtle techniques to bring out the meaning of the text. In the very opening, for example, a lengthy melisma calls attention to the word desiderat, depicting through music the feeling of longing. He does this throughout the piece, especially with words describing sweetness, joy, or other positive emotions. Going back to the connection between musical form and function, Buckstahuda's detailed text expression, which I discuss in more detail in my program notes for this concert, fits perfectly with the idea of the intimate, focused listening opportunity a private devotion might offer. Henry Purcell's Evening Hymn, composed in 1688, right around the same time, has a great deal in common with Buckstahuda's work. An evening hymn may also have been composed for private devotion. Both are chaconnes built on a repeating pattern in the bass, but Henry Purcell shows off that same poignant, direct, communicative style that makes the famous lament from his opera Dido and Aeneas so effective. Finally, Bach's Easter Oratorio. The Easter Oratorio's interesting history shows how the same work can be adapted to suit various purposes. It started its life as a secular cantata celebrating the birthday of Duke Christian of Saxony-Weissenfels in 1725. Bach later used this music as a basis of a sacred cantata for Easter, and brought it back again to commemorate the birthday of the Leipzig military governor, Count Joachim Friedrich von Flemming. In the mid-1730s, the work finally arrived at the form in which it will be performed on this program and given the title Easter Oratorio. How could Bach transform a work so easily? One possible conclusion is that the way he set the text for these works made it possible to substitute without losing dramatic impact. Rather than dwelling on individual words, as we heard in the motet Komm, Jesu, komm, Bach focused on projecting the overall sentiment of the text. As long as the new text shares the same affect and meter with the original, the switch would be easy to make without sacrificing expression. The text of the Easter Oratorio supports this interpretation. The main event is the resurrection, but after it's happened. The subject, therefore, becomes the emotions of the protagonists about Christ's death. Bach's 19th century biographer Spitta found this abbreviated version a little shocking. As he wrote, "It cannot but surprise us to find that Bach could have been satisfied with such a text. It might be supposed that the Passions would have been reason enough for his treating the history of the resurrection in a worthier and more dignified way." He later admits, however, that the Easter Oratorio was a work most likely designated for performance at a Lutheran service, quote, "in which there was only time for a piece about the length of a cantata," end quote. We return once again to musical function. Bach was a busy person with many, many demands on his time and a wealth of excellent, highly expressive music at his disposal. Why not reuse material when the emotion in common is the same? I am going to play the openings of the parallel concluding choruses from the Shepherd's Cantata, BWV 249A, and the Easter Oratorio, BWV 249. To be fair, the Shepherd's Cantata, the birthday cantata for the Duke, has been reconstructed from the Easter Oratorio, but hearing these numbers side by side gives you a sense of why Bach's recycling works so well. First, let's listen to Gluck Heil from the original birthday cantata. And now the chorus Preis und Dank that concludes the Easter Oratorio. Ultimately, what shines through is the effectiveness of Bach's music at communicating joy, whether over a Duke's birthday or the triumph of God over the devil. This concert has a little of everything, and I'm so excited about it. Internationally acclaimed soloists and our chorus singing Bach. Our virtuoso orchestra and concertmaster Kathleen Brower performing a Bach instrumental work that is so exciting and was new to me, plus 2 more Music of the Baroque premieres. It's a wonderful reminder of why our performances of Bach's St. Matthew Passion in April 2023 will be so special. And thinking about the social function of the music shows how even mundane circumstances like busy schedules can give rise to great things. I hope you enjoy Bach's Easter Oratorio and more on Sunday, April 10th at the North Shore Center in Skokie, Monday, April 11th at the Harris Theater for Music and Dance in Chicago, and on demand through May 15th. Thank you so much.